Act 1. The intro entering the monster's glass cage. The sharp sound of heels echoes down the damp, subterranean hallway of the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. The sterile stench of antiseptic punches you right in the face, completely mixed with the smell of decay. You walk past the dark cells, where deranged criminals are screaming their lungs out, throwing bodily fluids, and smashing their heads against the concrete walls. But in the very last cell, behind a thick, transparent wall of heavy-duty plexiglass, there is zero screaming. There is only a man in a blue standard-issue prison jumpsuit, standing perfectly upright, hands clasped neatly behind his back, with eyes as calm and still as a bottomless lake. He does not look like a monster. He looks like a tenured professor calmly waiting to greet his favorite student. That is Hannibal Lecter. Welcome to one of the absolute greatest, most ruthless, and mind-bending displays of psychological manipulation in the history of cinema. From the strict perspective of a behavioral analyst, this is not just a standard detective thriller. This is a clinical masterclass videotape on how a psychopathic narcissist establishes absolute environmental dominance. Today, we are going to step into the shoes of a forensic psychiatrist, taking a scalpel to dissect Hannibal's own brain. What exactly was processing through his mind when he first laid eyes on FBI trainee Clarice Starling? What high-level manipulation tactics did he deploy to turn heavily armed guards into his own personal puppets? And above all, how does an unarmed man locked in a cage manage to hack directly into the cognitive operating systems of everyone around him, using nothing but the sheer power of his vocal cords? Act 2: Cold Reading and the Alpha Strike. Let us rewind to that exact first moment Clarice walks up to the glass. If this were your average, run-of-the-mill serial killer, they would bark at her, throw out some cheap profanity, or try to act extremely tough to flex their authority. But Hannibal is built different. He plays heavy mind games right out of the gate. He is terrifyingly polite. He greets her with a smooth, slow, methodical voice. And then, in less than 60 seconds, he launches a massive psychological alpha strike that completely suffocates Clarice and the audience. In criminal psychology, this specific technique is heavily known as cold reading combined with micro-expression analysis. He literally sniffs the air through the ventilation holes. He casually states, "You use Evian skin cream, and sometimes you wear L'air du Temps, but not today." His eyes act like an X-ray scanner, ruthlessly scanning her entire outfit. He stares dead at her shoes and handbag, and slowly drops a highly toxic, judgmental read. He tells her she is wearing a good bag, but cheap shoes. He completely reads her for filth, essentially calling her a desperate country bumpkin trying to fake her way into high society. He stabs directly into her deeply hidden insecurities about her poor, white trash origins in West Virginia. He got her number, flawlessly. Through an analytical lens, what is Hannibal actually doing here? He is applying a massive neurological stress test to see if his prey is actually worth his time. He wants to establish absolute dominance, essentially asserting his home court advantage. If Clarice threw a tantrum, started crying, or ran away, she would instantly be eliminated from his game, discarded as a boring, weak toy. He is stripping away her armor, tearing down the protective shield she desperately built to survive in the heavily patriarchal, arrogant boys' club of the FBI. He forces her to acknowledge her own inferiority in their very first interaction. By accurately pinpointing her deepest insecurities, Hannibal perfectly establishes a grand illusion of omnipotence. He makes the victim deeply believe, "Standing in front of me, your lies are useless, I can read your mind like a cheap comic book." Act 3: Quid Pro Quo and the Toxic Therapy Trap. But Hannibal is an absolute mastermind. He knows perfectly well that if you just constantly roast and batter your opponent, they will automatically raise their defensive shields and shut down communication. To extract the juicy information he wants from Clarice, to make her voluntarily hand over her soul, he deploys a high-level manipulation tactic called the principle of equivalent exchange. He calls it Quid Pro Quo. On paper, it sounds like a fair trade. You tell me about the dark corners of your past, and I will dangle the carrot and give you a clue to catch the serial killer Buffalo Bill. Clarice, crushed by the intense pressure of a ticking clock and a girl trapped in a well, takes the bait. But she has absolutely zero realization that the second she nodded yes, she placed an invisible noose right around her own neck. Hannibal steps into the role of a dark, twisted psychotherapist, but instead of using his words to heal her trauma, he uses a mental scalpel to dig deeper into the infected wounds. He forces her to talk about the traumatic death of her police officer, father. He makes her relive the agonizing, freezing isolation of becoming an abandoned orphan. Why on earth does a cannibalistic serial killer crave this childhood drama so badly? Clinically speaking, this is the exact hallmark of a sadistic narcissist. The pure agony, the primal fear, and the tears of other human beings are his absolute favorite narcissistic supply, the drug that perfectly stimulates his brain. When Clarice trembles and confesses how she woke up to the horrific screaming of spring lambs being slaughtered, Hannibal closes his eyes and takes a deep breath, like he is tasting a vintage, 100-year-old wine. He manipulated Clarice by turning her into an emotionally dependent patient, essentially engineering trauma bonding on steroids. Every single time she surrenders a piece of her painful trauma, he rewards her with a breadcrumb of the case. This is textbook operant conditioning. In a real world where her powerful boss, Jack Crawford, just uses her as a cheap, disposable pawn to get information, Hannibal positions himself as a savior, a dark father figure who is the only person on Earth who truly understands her at her core. He successfully hacked her brain, making a naive FBI agent desperately crave validation from a literal monster. Act 4. The destructive power of words, the logging out of multiple MIGs. To truly comprehend the terrifying, destructive power embedded in Hannibal's words, we absolutely must analyze the death of the inmate in the cell next door, multiple MIGs. When Clarice finished her interrogation and walked away, Miggs committed an incredibly vile, disgusting act that deeply insulted her. To Hannibal, a man who obsessively worships extreme politeness, aristocratic manners, and artistic refinement, Miggs's filthy behavior was an unforgivable insult to his highly respected guest. That night, there was absolutely zero screaming, no physical altercations whatsoever. The asylum was dead silent. The night guards reported that they only heard the soft, whispering voice of Hannibal talking to Miggs through the stone wall all night long. The next morning, during the guard patrol, Miggs was found dead, having literally swallowed his own tongue in a state of absolute sheer panic. He unalived himself. From a neuroanalytical perspective, what dark magic did Hannibal use? He definitely did not use cheap street-level gangster threats. He weaponized his words like a microscopic surgical laser, slowly slithering into the deepest cracks of Miggs's already shattered nervous system. He knew perfectly well that Miggs suffered from severe schizophrenia, his brain constantly tortured by auditory hallucinations. Hannibal simply slipped into character, becoming one of those demonic voices. He whispered about Miggs's absolute darkest fears, directly manipulating his frontal lobe and amygdala. He essentially forced Miggs' brain to hallucinate the most horrifying imagery possible, pushing him into such an extreme storm of psychosis that Miggs' physical body could not take it anymore and actively shut itself down just to escape the mental agony. This is the absolute most brutal proof that master-level gaslighting has the power to turn human perception into a suicide bomb, all without leaving a single physical fingerprint at the crime scene. He lived rent-free in Miggs's head and burned it down from the inside. Act 5. The counter-manipulation mastermind playing cat and mouse with Dr. Chilton. Now, let us shift our analytical lens to how Hannibal plays with Dr. Frederick Chilton, the power-tripping, arrogant director of the asylum. Chilton is the perfect prototype of an incompetent narcissist. He craves fame, desperately wants to be on national television, and constantly deludes himself into believing he is the only man on Earth who can tame the beast that is Hannibal. Chilton imposes ruthless rules, confiscates personal belongings, turns off the heating, and cuts the lights, acting like a literal god playing with his subjects. But through Hannibal's analytical eyes, Chilton is nothing but a highly disposable pawn, a useful idiot blinded by his own massive ego. Hannibal instantly identifies Chilton's fatal weakness, his desperate greed for media attention and validation from the academic elite. So, Hannibal throws out a highly sophisticated manipulation bait known as ego stroking. He fakes a breakdown, he fakes a surrender. He agrees to give up the real identity of Buffalo Bill, but with a strict demand. He must be transferred to a new facility with a window viewing trees. And specifically, he refuses to work with Clarice anymore, demanding to only speak to the senator through Chilton's exclusive mediation. Chilton takes the bait, hook, line, and sinker, completely believing he just won a historic chess match and became the main character of America. He joyfully orchestrates a massive, highly publicized transfer, smugly fixing his hair and tie in front of dozens of media cameras, absolutely convinced he is about to be canonized as a national hero. But this average, mediocre director had absolutely no idea he was dancing perfectly in the palm of Hannibal's hand. Hannibal provided a completely fake name. The obedient cooperation was nothing but a massive smokescreen, a brilliant misdirection to get Hannibal out of that heavily fortified underground dungeon in Baltimore. He desperately needed to be moved to a looser environment where he could activate the brutal escape plan he had meticulously calculated in his head for years. He manipulated Chilton by inflating his ego with delusions of grandeur, making him voluntarily pull out the keys and open the cage for the apex predator. He flawlessly manipulated his own warden. Act 6, the perfection of violence and the blind illusion of safety. The final chapter, and the absolute bloodiest performance in Hannibal's symphony of manipulation, takes place in the Memphis courthouse. At this point, he is temporarily held in a massive iron cage placed right in the middle of a grand hall. Two highly experienced veteran police officers, Pembry and Boyle, are assigned to guard him 24/7. They are armed to the teeth, covered in weapons, and strictly maintain absolute textbook safe distances at all times. How in the world does a handcuffed man locked in an iron cage manage to completely turn the tables against two loaded guns? Through the eyes of an expert, the answer lies in the technique of engineering, the illusion of safety, and exploiting inattentional blindness. For several days straight, Hannibal plays the role of the absolute model prisoner. He politely says thank you when his meals are delivered. He sits peacefully with his eyes closed, listening to classical music tapes. He sketches art with the elegant grace of a scholar. He intentionally establishes a rhythmic, incredibly boring, repetitive routine with zero threatening variables. The human brain, no matter how highly trained, has a fatal biological flaw: rapid habituation and inattentional blindness. When a scenario repeats endlessly without any actual danger arising, the central nervous system automatically lowers its threat detection to conserve energy. Pembry and Boyle were caught slipping. They gradually lost their sharp edge, dropped their guard, and started viewing Hannibal as just a quirky, highly educated old man who likes classical music rather than a lethal, cold-blooded killing machine. Hannibal knows the prey is perfectly primed. He patiently waits for the exact moment the two cops bring him his dinner. He smoothly extracts a tiny, microscopic piece of metal he cleverly stole from the pen of the idiot Chilton earlier. With just a tiny scrap of metal, he effortlessly picks the handcuffs, and the second the iron door opens, the illusion of safety is violently shattered into a million pieces. The ensuing scene is not just an explosion of savage physical violence, it is a deeply sick, artistic performance designed for high-level crowd manipulation. He does not just quickly dispatch the two cops to escape. He takes the time to hang Boyle's brutally mutilated body on the iron mesh, spreading his arms wide like a gory, blood-soaked angel. Why would a highly wanted fugitive waste precious time decorating such a horrifying crime scene? Because he wants to manipulate the entire external security apparatus. He wants to deliver a massive psychological shock, inducing severe cognitive overload for the SWAT team about to breach the room. When dozens of heavily armed officers storm in, that bloody angel completely short-circuits their amygdala. They are horrified, they are panicking, they completely lose their tactical focus and completely forget to check the blind spots on top of the elevator. They just frantically rush a heavily bleeding, severely wounded officer with a completely bandaged face into an ambulance to save his life. And that is the absolute mic drop, the ultimate slap in the face to the entire law enforcement system. The dying man groaning in the back of that ambulance is none other than Hannibal himself. He literally sliced off Officer Pembry's face and wore it as a mask, walking right past the most heavily armed security perimeter in America. He weaponized the crowd's own empathy for a fallen brother and their sheer panic to pave his own flawless escape route. Act 7, the outro, the perfect apex predator of the mind. The masterpiece concludes with Hannibal casually strolling down a beautiful, sun-drenched, bustling street in the Bahamas, calmly calling Clarice from a public payphone. His final goodbye contains zero hatred, zero cheap, violent gangster threats. He simply asks her one soft question that will permanently echo in her brain forever. Clarice, have the lambs stopped screaming? That phrase is the perfect conclusion to a profound psychological manipulation operation. He wants to know if his twisted, dark psychotherapy actually helped her soothe her deepest childhood trauma. To Clarice, Hannibal is the most terrifying monster on Earth. But paradoxically, he is also the only human being who forced her to confront her pain, helping her liberate her soul from the screaming lambs in the dark. Hannibal Lecter cemented his legacy as the greatest villain of all time, not because he has the physical strength of a superhero or wields advanced weaponry. He is legendary because he holds the master source code to the human operating system. He knows exactly how to crush the deepest hidden traumas, he knows how to inflate the egos of the power-hungry, and he knows how to use words to create deafening, lethal noise inside a victim's head. This story leaves us with a bone-chilling warning. The most terrifying enemy is not a massive thug standing in a dark alley with a knife. The most terrifying enemy is the one who smiles politely, wears a tailored suit, sips a glass of fine wine, listens intently to your deepest vulnerabilities, and then weaponizes those exact secrets to turn your own mind into a permanent prison with no exit. When you are sitting across from a monster equipped with empathy, that is the exact moment you can never, ever save yourself.